Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Kimberly Sullivan. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Kimberly Sullivan was born on March 22, 1968, and lived in Waterbury, Connecticut. This is about 91 miles northeast of New York City. In January 1995, Kimberly married a man named Craig Sullivan. He had been born in 1962, so he was about 6 years older than Kimberly. Craig had been married before. In 1992, he married a woman named Tracy. They had a son together on March 7, 1993. I will refer to their son as John, as in John Doe. Tracy gave up custody of John, so he lived with his father, Craig. In 1996, a year after Kimberly and Craig married, the family moved into a 4-bedroom, 1,700-square-foot house at 2 Blake Street in Waterbury. About 28 years later, in January 2024, Craig Sullivan died, leaving Kimberly to care for her stepson alone. The cause of Craig's expiration was not specified. However, he had been in a wheelchair due to medical conditions in the time leading up to his death. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On February 17, 2025, at 8:42 p.m., Kimberly called 911 and reported a fire at her house on Blake Street. Firefighters and police officers responded to the scene and found Kimberly standing outside the house. She was not injured. Firefighters entered the residence and removed her stepson, John Doe. The fire damage to the house was mostly contained to the second floor. The police approached John when he was in an ambulance waiting to be treated by paramedics. They noticed that he did not look healthy. John was 5'9", but only weighed 68 pounds. He was very dirty, and his teeth were rotten. John admitted that he was the one who set the fire in the house. He used a lighter, paper, and hand sanitizer to ignite the blaze in his second-floor room. The reason he did this was because he had been held hostage in the house since he was about 11 years old. The perpetrator of this alleged offense was his stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan. According to John, she locked him in his room using a lock mounted on the outside of the door. John was transported to a hospital where he was treated for smoke inhalation. At the scene, the police spoke to Kimberly, who told them that she woke up due to the smoke and made her way to John's room. She saw a large amount of fire in his doorway. Kimberly claimed that John was saying something about the television. She screamed at him to get out of the room, and John ran through the fire to escape. When the police inquired about whether John had any mental disorders, Kimberly said that he had a lot of problems, but had not been diagnosed with anything because his father, Craig, had been opposed to seeking any type of care. Despite this, Kimberly brought John to a mental health professional a few times in the past. When asked about whether John was locked inside his room, Kimberly said the door was not locked and John had free rein of the house. The fire department determined that the origin of the fire was John's second-floor room, which was consistent with his statement to the police. The room was a back storage space, which measured 8 feet by 9 feet and had an angled ceiling. The room did not have any heat or air conditioning, but it did have a window. The door to John's room had been removed by firefighters as part of their effort to fight the fire. There was a latch on the outside of the door consistent with a slide lock. On the outside of the door frame, there was a slide lock which matched the height of the latch attached to the door. This supports John's assertion that his room door had been locked from the outside. The police interviewed John extensively after he recovered enough to speak with them. Here is the story that he told them. Starting when John was about 3 years old, he remembered living with his father, Craig Sullivan, and his stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, at a different residence. They were not yet living in the house on Blake Street. John did not have enough food to eat. When he became hungry, he would sneak out of his room at night to get food. Eventually, his father and stepmother discovered the food wrappers and locked him in his room. At first, he was only trapped in the room at night. John was only given about 2 cups of water per day, so he had to drink from a toilet. In 1996, his family moved into the house on Blake Street in Waterbury. In elementary school, John continued to be hungry all the time. He would steal food, beg for food, and remove food from trash receptacles. This behavior attracted the attention of social services. When he was in the 4th grade, the Department of Children and Families stopped by the family home on Blake Street. John's stepmother, Kimberly, directed him to tell the caseworkers that everything was fine. After DCF workers visited for a second time, Kimberly pulled John out of school. For a short time, she attempted to teach him at home by providing him worksheets, but that was the extent of his homeschooling journey. John told the police that there had always been a lock on his room door, although the type of lock changed over the years. There was a chain lock, a padlock, and ultimately a slide bolt lock. At first, he was in an actual bedroom, but later he was moved to the storage area, which is where he stayed for the remainder of his time in the house. Kimberly forced John into a brutal daily routine. Again, this is all according to John. He was released from his room at about 8 a.m. and forced to complete several chores, which could take up to 2 hours. In the late morning, he was locked in his room for the remainder of the day and through the overnight hours. During weekends, his father, Craig, would let him out of the room for longer periods of time. Occasionally, they would watch television together. The last time John was permitted to leave the family property was when he was about 14 or 15 years old. His father had taken him on a trip to dump yard waste. After Craig Sullivan died in January 2024, Kimberly's behavior became worse. The only time John was permitted outside was to take the family dog into the backyard each day. It only took about 1 minute. This was his entire experience outside the house. Kimberly gave John up to 2 sandwiches a day. Over time, he would get less and less food. When investigators asked if he was hungry every day, John responded, "All day, every day, my entire life." John indicated that after setting the fire, he collapsed on the floor and stayed there because he wanted to be taken from the house by firefighters. He believed this was his best chance of escape. John told the police, "I wanted my freedom." Based on John's statements to the police and other evidence that was collected, Kimberly Sullivan was arrested on March 12, 2025. She was charged with assault in the 1st degree, kidnapping in the 2nd degree, unlawful restraint in the 1st degree, intentional cruelty to a person, and reckless endangerment in the 1st degree. She is facing up to 51 years in prison if convicted on all charges. After posting a $300,000 bond, Kimberly was released on March 20. At the time I am making this video, Kimberly is working her way through the legal system toward her trial. Her next hearing is on March 26, 2025. Now moving to my analysis. Kimberly Sullivan maintains her innocence. Her attorney has called the charges against her outlandish and suggested that Craig Sullivan was the one who made decisions about his son's care. Craig had been dead for over a year when Kimberly was arrested, so this seems like a strange tactic, but this is what her attorney is going with. The state, of course, disagrees. They argue that Kimberly is one of the worst offenders imaginable. This brings me to the question, is Kimberly guilty of assault, kidnapping, and the other charges against her? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that she is guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. John told the police that his mother, Kimberly Sullivan, held him hostage for many years. Physical evidence, like the slide lock found on his doorframe, support John's claim. His physical condition was consistent with someone who had been denied food and medical care for years. There is no reason John would have done that to himself. Technically, John had opportunities to get away from his stepmother, but this could be explained by her conditioning him to be afraid. He may have been mentally unable to escape. Moving to the exculpatory factors, Kimberly's attorney noted that the allegations against her appear to be based on the words of one individual. He also indicated that her stepson was never locked in a room. When John Doe set the fire, he was 32 years old. He acknowledged he could have left the situation with his stepmother. For example, he went outside for a minute a day. Neighbors said that he briefly communicated with them, saying hi and bye. If he was able to do that, John could have asked them to call the police. In April 2005, the Department of Children and Families stopped by Kimberly's house on Blake Street. They reported that nothing was amiss. Certainly, if something criminal was going on, DCF would not have missed it. If they did, one could make an argument that they are completely incompetent. When considering all the evidence in this case, Do I think that Kimberly Sullivan is guilty? Yes, I believe she is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt on all charges. At the time I'm making this video, Kimberly is 57 years old. Perhaps she could reach a plea bargain which allows her to be released from prison someday. If Kimberly takes this case to trial, the jury will see photographs of John, which I imagine would be shocking. Guilty verdicts on all charges would follow shortly. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Craig and Kimberly Sullivan were demanding, manipulative, deceptive, controlling, irresponsible, sadistic, and exceedingly creepy. They decided to take complete control over John. They used his desire to eat food, which is pretty common with human beings, as an excuse to lock him in his room. The couple held John hostage for years, but they had no obvious financial incentive to do so. It wasn't like they earned money from this. Rather, it's possible their satisfaction came by way of sadism. They were thrilled to cause John suffering. Withholding food was also an effective way to maintain control. When Craig died, Kimberly continued the tradition they had started. John was in a terrible position from the beginning. From the age of 3, he was exposed to unbelievable mistreatment. This conditioned him to accept the environment he was in. He was also motivated to cooperate because Kimberly allegedly threatened him with more severe punishment if he attempted to escape or reach out to anyone for help. John was physically trapped in his room by a lock on his door, but he was also mentally trapped by the conditioning at the hands of Kimberly. Mental health clinicians assessed John and found that he had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. It is not unusual for people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder to stay in dangerous situations due to fear and due to intimidation. Furthermore, according to John, Kimberly led him to believe that she was going to let him out of his room more. She would give him hope, like the future would be bright. Things were going to change. That, of course, never happened, but the promise of it prevented John from reaching out for help. Eventually, John arrived at a point where he was willing to risk more severe punishment in order to escape his stepmother. Kimberly had pushed him too far. He gambled everything on his fire plan, and fortunately, he was rescued. His stepmother allegedly caused massive damage as far as John's mental and physical health, but she could not crush his desire for freedom. Now moving to my final thoughts. Some people look at the case of Kimberly Sullivan and are perplexed by her alleged behavior. One element of the cruelty that really stands out is how Kimberly was allegedly focused on controlling food. If she was guilty, this meant that she kept her stepson in a state of hunger for over 20 years. People wonder if this behavior is unique to Kimberly or if this is something which has been seen before. Well, several years ago, I covered the Turpin family tragedy, which possesses a few parallels to the Sullivan case. David and Louise Turpin were from West Virginia and ultimately ended up in California. They lived in Texas in between. They had 13 children between 1988 and 2005. The couple stayed quite busy. They held their children hostage by chaining them to beds and locking them in dog cages. They also did not feed them properly, which led to malnourishment. The couple had a strong obsession with food and keeping food away from their children. Ultimately, their daughter Jordan, who was 17 at the time, escaped and contacted the police. Her courage led to all her siblings being saved. David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 offenses and received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The Turpins not only held their victims hostage physically, they held them hostage mentally by using manipulation to gain control. They convinced their children that the world was an extremely dangerous place. Escaping was pointless because the people on the outside of the house were just as bad as the people inside. The Turpin children were afraid of their parents and afraid of the entire world. Kimberly Sullivan allegedly used a similar strategy, except the fear involved was only of her, not of the outside world. As far as the hunger component of the Turpin case, there is no clear reason for the couple's behavior. One possibility was that David and Louise were genuinely afraid of caffeine and sugar. Therefore, in their minds, they were protecting their children by keeping them away from food. The family also had severe financial concerns, but did not seek help from charities. This may have been based on paranoia, like the parents were just as afraid of the outside world as the children. Maybe this is what happened with the Sullivan case. In some twisted way, perhaps Kimberly thought she was protecting her stepson. There is no way to know for certain. Her motive remains a mystery at this point, but I think the most likely explanation is that the lack of food was used to maintain domination and control. This case is really about sadism. Regardless of why Kimberly allegedly imprisoned her stepson, she needs to go to prison. As with many of the severe crimes I've covered, the mental health components are fascinating, but largely academic as far as punishment is concerned. If Kimberly is guilty, she is too dangerous to be free. Creating a lifelong hostage situation is an offense so heinous, it demands separation from society. Kimberly will have no reason to complain if she takes a magical prison journey. The conditions in prison are better than those endured by her stepson. Those are my thoughts on the case of Kimberly Sullivan. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.